Joining for a webinar on planning very large-scale document repositories with high availability and SharePoint Server 2013. Quick introduction about me. My name is Chandra Gundlapalli. I'm working as a VP of Enterprise Architecture at Winvoy Technologies. And our company, sorry, I think the wrong, our company is specialized in consulting for IT solutions in SharePoint, BI, Azure, and Cloud. As Noor mentioned, we have implemented a lot of solutions in this area, and we'll be glad to help for your if you have any requirements in the similar area. Okay, let's start with a simple story for this webinar. This is a story of Bob and why he is sad. And because he deployed SharePoint and things were pretty good. So what's the main problem here? Let's figure out. So he needs to provide the following functionality to his organization in terms of providing a very large-scale document repositories for document management systems, highest possible availability for this newly implemented large-scale document repository, and the lowest maintenance possible, and also should reduce the operation costs, and having a goal for predictable elastic architecture that can grow with the deployment for future enhancements. So these are the 4 goals that he needs to provide to his organization now. So as part of the architect, he needs to, he has a lot of people to please in terms of IT support, legal and compliance, and other teams and stakeholders. So looking at all the big initiatives, users are concerned. Obviously, they don't want this to be hard and they don't want this to be too much manual work, and that's why they're a little concerned. So Bob thinks that SharePoint seems to provide the right capabilities, and or do you think it does provide all the capabilities? We'll take a look. So Bob is not entirely sure on how to proceed. So this is where we come into the picture. Let's help Bob with planning very large-scale document repositories in SharePoint. So that is a brief story which explains about some of the scenarios in a lot of organizations nowadays. A lot of people, a lot of teams start in SharePoint as a simple proof of concept or simple workload, and they will end up in scenarios of what we just discussed about Bob's story. So we're going to cover all these aspects, and today's agenda is going to be concentrated on these 5 different pillars or 5 different topics. We're going to cover estimating performance and capacity requirements. How do you plan for it? We're going to show some of the benchmarks that are already done for performance and scale benchmarks, which will quickly give you an idea of how you need to design your forms and functionality. And we're going to look into planning end-user security for large document libraries. That is one of the areas that is going to be very interesting and challenging if your organization is going to implement large document libraries with item-level permissions. The point there is item-level permissions or fine-grained permissions. We'll talk and discuss about that in depth. The 4th one is disaster recovery strategies. What are the strategies that you need to plan for to address the disaster recovery scenarios? The last one is going to be high availability and how we need to plan for high availability using remote blob storage. So let's dig into the first topic, that is estimating performance and capacity requirements. So this slide, which explains pretty much the enterprise content management in terms of either it can be a SharePoint or some other document management or content management system. It's pretty much like creating and organizing content easily, controlling the content in terms of creating policies and information architecture and taxonomy. And the 3rd one is going to be protecting. How will you protect that content following the compliance? Either it could be a SAS 70 or it could be a SOX compliance or HIPAA compliance. So how would you go about it? So on a high level, these are the enterprise-wide, this is what is behind enterprise content management sort of giving a very quick idea. All of you are aware, but that brings back to how will we design a SharePoint form? Pretty much, there are simple rules like the motivation and the basic ideas. Motivation is going to be end user experience is what really it matters. Either it could be a workflow, either it could be a document management system, it could be an other scenario for using BI dashboards in SharePoint. End user experience is really what matters. How best we are providing, how responsive the site is, how simple, how best it is to use. And at the same time, that falls back into the category of providing a SLA. What is the SLA that we are putting together for when we are designing the form? So going to the designing for better SLA. So here you will look at some of the architectures for SLAs in terms of how will you plan for scaling out independently, scaling up independently. There are different aspects in the SharePoint forms that you need to look into. I think pretty much most of you are aware of there is a typical database layer, batch processing layer, front end, and the newly introduced request management or distribution cache. And here we are explaining what are the different parameters that are going to be tied together for each of the layer. For example, if you look at, take a look at the database layer, the latency should be low. The goal should be latency should be low, throughput should be high, resource utilization, it's kind of a medium when compared with other parameters here. Desired behavior is consistent latency. But if you look at the similar thing for batch processing, it is a little bit opposite of it. The latency should be faster. That should be, it should process lots of files and lots of pretty much when it comes to excuse me, search or crawling, the latency will be high. Throughput and also high, and resource utilization, since it will be processing lots of content, it will be high. So like that, if you see, we have highlighted here, and in some scenarios where there will be specialized workloads in terms of specific to search configuration, and here are the parameters. So we are also going to share this presentation. You will take a look at these different parameters when you are designing for SLA. What are the different factors which will affect? Noor, am I going fast or slow, or is it okay?
Okay, fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, sure.
So, Noor, I did not get that.
Right, no issues.
Okay. Okay. Very good. Very good.
Yeah.
Okay. Next one is going to be when we look at the evaluation of topology. There are different topologies which are basically there are standard benchmarks that you can look into. If you start with a very simple workload for your company, either in terms of a proof of concept or something like evaluation, and if you think that end users are going to be less than 100 users, you will pretty much go with a single server which is going to do all this database, batch processing, front end, and routing. But if you go to the next level, you will basically improve on the topology. If it is a small content and fault tolerance, you will look at increasing your web front ends from 1 to n depending on your workload, and also database the same scenario. So similarly, 10K users, if you look at the 10K users, more workloads, more resources, you will really look into batch processing servers to scale up and scale out independently. You will look at the batch processing in terms of pretty much the crawling functionality, which is going to be a key factor. And also, if you look at more and more users, this is pretty much where you will put your routing and caching layers and the front-end layers, specialized layers, where you will add a lot of front-end servers, and pretty much it gives you an idea of how you can scale up and scale out independently for your topology. So the next slide explains what defines your SharePoint. There are different aspects to it. Now we know what is the SLA, how we are going to implement the topology. You can put these into 4 buckets. One is the workload, hardware, data set, and SLA. So all this together, you are going to concentrate, and we're going to show you a sample dog food form for that Microsoft currently uses. this you can take it as a reference where you will look at, hey, for example, if there are 15,000 users, how is this being implemented on the hardware side? How is the data set going to play? How is the SLA coming to picture? And what are the different servers doing at peak time? So pretty much it gives you an idea when you look at you need to look at different areas in the form: workload, hardware, data set, and SLA. So capacity planning resources. This is something I think it will be very interesting for you when during your capacity planning scenario. Look at what is available out there as the resources. These are all available for you to take a look at as a reference. Topologies and SharePoint services and multi-form architectures, and also when it comes to the capacity planning, some of the things you need to look into. What are the software boundaries and limits? How will you avoid those when you are designing the form? So those are the things that are going to come into picture. And performance and capacity test results are also available for some of the SharePoint 2010 installations from Microsoft. You can look at and to help you in planning your for your capacity planning and monitoring. And there are different aspects that you can look into for monitoring. So this is again a cheat sheet which will give you pretty much what are the different components, what is that is going to play in a role in terms of a CPU, network, disk, or memory. Where the, for example, if you look at the crawler, the network is going to use a lot of network resources. So just a cheat sheet on when you were designing your different SLAs. So this is also again a sample worksheet. This is going to really help you coming up with what is the size, database size that you will look at with different fields. I think most of you are aware of some of these things, for example, the configuration or central administration of the content, but you might need to really look into what is the capacity needed for usage and health data, search administration, crawling, etc., etc. This also is a cheat sheet which will help you designing your capacity planning for future needs. So that covers our first topic, which clearly showed you what are the different things that you will look into, different SLAs, different parameters that you will look into, and different topologies that you will look into when you design the form. Now the second point or topic is going to concentrate on performance benchmark. So when you go to the when you look at the SharePoint 2013 deployments, it's pretty much, I think, one of the biggest leap in Microsoft SharePoint history, that it has done a lot of improvements in terms of it is faster, more scalable, more reliable, and total cost. So we'll look into those different aspects. Forms scale better. There are so many improvements done, but on top of it, obviously, software has its limitations for own reasons in terms of database availability, database queries, and etc. That somebody has to keep in mind. So these benchmarks are going to show you on a very high level, when you compare the 2013 with 2010, what are the improvements that are done in terms of requests per second or server response, and etc. That gives you a good idea. Even if your company is planning to migrate to SharePoint 2013, some of these slides, some of these reference benchmarks are going to really help you when you talk to your C-level executives or stakeholders for their buy-in also. And again, this is one of the good slide here. For example, let's say tomorrow you are planning for implementing a SharePoint form starting from scratch, or you are planning to migrate. This one chart will really help you guide your administrators or the resource planning team on what is that you are planning to achieve in terms of latency or request per second. And if you look at the chart, you can clearly and easily take a decision very quickly, depending on SLAs. Hey, I want to provide, for example, the latency of around 600 and requests per second for pretty much 300 or something like that. You will look at, you will end up here, and you will look at, hey, I need 6 front ends and 1 caching server and 1 SQL. So that gives you very good idea, instead of you starting to implement a POC, implement benchmarks, and etc., which is going to take a lot of time. So this is for sure one of the slides you can refer to all the time when you are planning for your form hardware. So the next topic is very, very interesting. It's going to be planning end user security for large document libraries. The reason I say is a lot of companies really doesn't look into how they're going to plan for end user security. If you give the end user security as a self-service for the end users, within no time it will be very unmanageable. It's going to cause a lot of performance issues or stuff like that. The reason why I say is, let's assume that your company uses 10 million documents. What will it take for giving item level permissions or fine-grained permissions for all these document libraries of 10 million documents? You do the math and think about some of the limitations that are in the platform itself, think about some of the information architecture, and try to imagine what would it be in an unmanageable situation. So here I'm going to guide you on how you can look at and address this problem. This is just a conceptual model. Just I have put together for some of you who are not into the SharePoint security model, just on a very high level. There are identity area. There is an authentication, which is pretty much you can use any third-party authorization providers also. But if you have Active Directory, you can use the Active Directory integration here. And this is the SharePoint web application. From SharePoint application, there will be an authorization done in terms of user permissions and roles and groups and etc. etc. So pretty much identity, authentication, and authorization. This is a conceptual security model in SharePoint. So here, when you look at the end user security recommendation, suggestion is to use inheritance as much as possible. That is going to take out a lot of unnecessary scope, unnecessary scoping limitations, unnecessary performance issues or something like that. So that is the one suggestion. I think most of you are aware of it and most of you are using. But the next one is going to be, if you implement the inheritance, you will end up with something like this. If you see the gold hexagon here, this is pretty much is showing how many different scopes are there and how, if you implement the inheritance, the security scopes are going to stay the same. That's why you will not be seeing any of performance issues. We completely agree that in all the scenarios, this might not be possible to give inheritance to implement inheritance, because there are different departments, different users, different folders, and different security scenarios. Then the fine-grained permissions or item-level permissions are going to come into the picture. So on a very high level, what we are going to suggest is you can actually break the inheritance. You can create a SharePoint library scope for each of the document library, and you can basically give unique permissions for the folders. And if you have to achieve this out of the box, there are going to be a lot of performance issues that are going to be causing this. If you use out-of-the-box security scenarios, this is going to cause a lot of issues in terms of performance. You need to look into some of the scope re-architecture. You need to use dynamic security changing code redesign. That can only be possible if you implement a custom functionality when you are adding security. So with that, what you will be achieving here is you will be using a SP group object access GP1 or something like that, which basically is nothing but a dynamic security, which will pretty much limit the limited groups in SharePoint. If you are aware of the limited groups, you will appreciate how many limited groups it is going to stop and how it is going to improve the performance. This is, again, we will be providing you some of the other details in our blog also. When you are designing your fine-grained permissions, this is one of the most critical things that a lot of architects, a lot of people miss. You need to look at the dynamic security design to improve your performance. That is something something you need to really look into when you have big document repositories. Okay. The next section, I think we covered the most important section or the topic for the end user security. We will look into disaster recovery strategies. For example, most of you might have already looked at some of the scenarios for disaster recovery architecture. Pretty much you have an active form which is working, and there is a backup form. And you will be, as you know, a lot of databases here, you will be looking at mirroring all these into the backup form. If in case the active form goes down, you will be bringing up the backup form. But how much time you will be looking at in bringing up the backup form is going to be a key factor when you are deciding different disaster recovery scenarios. So here we have very clearly mentioned about each of the different options. So there are going to be hot standby, which is pretty much like when your active server goes down, you can bring up the other server in seconds or minutes. So that is pretty much like you have multiple data centers and content and services through only one data center, and it will be very easy to recover from the disaster. The warm standby is pretty much like a second data center that can provide availability within minutes or hours. It's pretty much like virtual server images that you need to ship, and which will be less costly compared with the first option. The cold standby is nothing but second data center that can provide availability within hours or days. This can be the slowest option, but this can be cost effective if you think that your business is okay with this scenario. Again, all these pros and cons and different scenarios, you need to talk to your stakeholders and set their expectations when you design your SLAs to come up with what is your disaster recovery. But this should help you in designing or basically taking a decision for the disaster recovery. Okay, the last section. I think high availability with RBS. So remote blob storage, for example, let me actually quickly show you high availability with RBS and effects of RBS on SQL Server database size. RBS stands for remote blob storage. For example, if your requirement is that your end users are uploading lots of videos and unstructured data and a lot of files, and if you think that database is growing rapidly, that is going to cause a lot of performance issues in terms of users accessing the files, and also when it comes to the administrators for backup and restore purposes also. So this is where you will really look into implementing a remote blob storage using SQL, which already SharePoint already supports. You will look into the default option that SharePoint and SQL Server provides, but there are other options in the market out there. There are a lot of companies who using RBS, remote blob storage. They have implemented products with which you can actually store all these database into the cloud storage itself for high availability and global deployments and redundancy, etc., etc. also. So this also should help you in looking at what will it help when you implement remote blob storage, and also look at the product, third-party products on storing or getting advantages of cloud storage. Nowadays, storage is coming very cheaply, and you need to plan for that based on some of the functionality which is already available. So that should cover high availability with RBS, and pretty much we are at the end of the presentation. Hope this gives you an idea about taking decisions when you are designing your forms, especially for large-scale document repositories on setting the SLAs. How will you plan for end-user security? How will you plan for disaster recovery? And how will you make sure you are designing the backend with remote blob storage? So we would like to ask you if you have any questions or clarifications, we'll be glad to spend some time addressing those. And also, if you have any detailed business requirements that you think that our team is going to help, we'll be glad to sit with you and help address and provide our consulting services also. So going back to Noor for questions.
Thanks, Chandra. Thanks. It was a very useful session, and we'll take up the questions if we have any here. Okay, just